welcome. I'm Andrea Berlin of the Program in Archaeology and the Department of Religion, and it's a great pleasure to see you here. I think people will be filtering in. As of this morning, we had 90 registrations for this, but you know students, and students you know yourselves, so people will come and go, and we will just work with it. You see the program, this amazing program that we have on the screen here, 6 speakers. Each speaker will talk for between 15 and 20 minutes, and then there will be time, about 10 minutes for Q&A. I have a mic. Why? Because we're recording this to put on the Yuval Center's website. And is it a YouTube channel? What is it? And therefore, you need to speak into the mic. So I will do that thing that the talk show people do, and I will run around with the mic while our honored speaker is up here fielding questions. Well, we're here for a day about Jerusalem, an amazing city, and we ourselves are in an amazing city in Boston. I was thinking about this morning. Cities are one of the great inventions of us humans. Cities are special and different places. They are their own worlds, they're microcosms. They bring people together from different backgrounds. They allow strangers to feel part of something bigger than themselves and part of something together. So all cities have this magical property, but some cities are more magical than others. And Jerusalem is one of those cities. So today we go through time, not from the beginning of time in Jerusalem itself, but from the first millennium BCE and then up all the way to the present with our speakers. So let me just get started and introduce our first speaker. Professor Yuval Gadot is the head of the ALCO Department of Archaeology and Ancient Near Eastern Cultures at Tel Aviv University. He co-directs the Givati parking lot excavations. He leads a team of researchers and archaeologists studying the city's surrounding rural landscape. I meant to bring the book, the newest book but I would have had to bring a big stack to bring all of Yuval's books. His newest book, about which you will not hear, he will not discuss, is about this amazing part of Jerusalem, which was a giant garbage dump. And there's really fascinating stuff there. So if anybody's interested, I have a copy in my office. So Yuval, I'm going to invite you to come up here. And I'm going to close this a little bit.
Do I have also to stand by the mic all the time, or do you hear me without me being close to the mic? Okay, so okay, so I'm on. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you for organizing the day, and thank you for everybody who came. As I walked with the title, the Colonial City, Jerusalem, I was sitting and preparing the lecture. And exactly at that time, the Israeli public broadcasting services began a new series on the days of the British mandate over Jerusalem. And it was there, the presentation was there, the TV was on the other side. And I kept hearing how they are describing Amin al-Husseini as a colonial client at the end. Somebody who is at one point, okay, this is not the period I'm going to talk about, just to make sure that you understand. On the one hand, he's receiving money from the British mandate. He's an official within their administration. And at the same time, he's undermining their administration. And at the same time, he's also trying to buy benefits from the administration. A very complex situation. And I thought that this Jerusalem that I'm trying to vision in the Iron Age is really in more or less on the same situation, where you have the Assyrians and you have the local clients who are trying to somehow maneuver between this very, very powerful power of the empire and on the one hand and their local wishes. And when we say local, it's not always, they're not unified. We'll try to kind of understand this moment in history, but definitely in 1930, 40, the Palestinians on the one side, the Jewish Zionists on the other, and you can also kind of locate more and more fractions, and everybody is trying to maneuver with the British administration. So what I'll try to do today is to go back to Iron Age Jerusalem, especially of the 8th and 7th century BCE, and try to understand it as a colonial encounter, as a moment of these encounters. When you open up the biblical description of Jerusalem in those days, and mainly the kings, you all the time hear about bad kings and good kings, from Ahaz being one of the evil ones, to Hezekiah being very loyal to God, again to Menashe, who is a villain, and usually the villains get just a line. He was a villain and that's it. And then Josiah is getting more and more text. And the text in the Book of Kings speaks about their religious kind of situation and how they follow the laws of the Lord, or they kind of did other awful things. But in reality, I think that at the backstage, there was this thing, the kind of maneuvering between being very independent, Hezekiah, and I chose the fortification of the spring as a symbol of independence for Jerusalem. Hezekiah is rebelling, and Josiah is also in a way already, the Assyrians are not there and he's maneuvering without them. And Ahaz and Menashe are blamed for being bad, but what they do actually is cooperate with the empire that is behind, and that's why they are bad. So the front is the religious reforms, and at the backstage there is the politics. I think it's always together. It's just our illusion that there is politics and there's religion and there's economy. It's all intermixed together. So if we now look at what the archaeologists have done with that, you see that the archaeologists that studied Jerusalem until I think 10 or 15 years ago kind of took the stand of the biblical text, and since Hezekiah was credited with so many things, they credit him archaeologically with projects like moving the water from one side of the hill to the other, building the fortification, and the fact that Jerusalem survived after the war. And the refugees is also a result, the Israelite and the refugees that are coming from the lower Shfela is also a result of encounter with the empire, but they're always the bad guys. They're always making damage, and then they are refugees. And Hezekiah is being built. And as I said, Menashe or the Chaz before him, they are credited with nothing except for being evil, and that's it, and responsible for the destruction that will come at 586 BC. And so Menashe, archaeologically, if you open up things that were written, there's almost nothing about him from the archaeological perspective, and I think it's because of kind of taking the Book of Kings as the roadmap to how we understand the archaeology of Jerusalem and Judah in general. And I will try in this 15 minutes that I have left, more or less, to kind of evaluate Menashe. This is not Menashe, just so you know. This is a share that was found with a drawing at Ramat Rachel, a site that was kind of created for the first time during the reign of Menashe. A share that was found there, and it's very unique because it's showing a human figure, something that we hardly see in the archaeology of Jerusalem of the Iron Age. And scholars are debated whether we are seeing here an Assyrian-styled Judean local leader that is drawn in Assyrian style, or a Judean-style representation of an Assyrian figure. And I don't think there's a solution for that, because that's exactly colonial encounters. And look at this and remember Haj Amin al-Husseini before. And I will try to use now the archaeology in order to try and recognize the first part of the 7th century and understand these moments exactly. And we'll start with the rural landscape of Jerusalem, not the city itself. I will mainly concentrate on the things that were found in the last 3 or 4 or 5 years. We have one of the excavators here of the sites that I'm going to present. And the rural landscape of Jerusalem, it was clear archaeologically that is alive during this 8th, 7th, mainly 7th century BC and until the destruction of Jerusalem. There is a spike in the number of sites. You find, I think today it will be around 64 rural sites. It's not a lot of population. It's mainly small farmsteads, just activities in the landscape. And like if you evaluate these kind of sites, you see that they are moving from more administrative or royal centers and all the way down to wine presses in the vineyard. And in the middle, there's a line of landmarks, sites that I don't know how to call them, and you'll see them. And I think they are connected exactly with the story that we want to look at. It's things that were found mainly to the south of Jerusalem, between Jerusalem and Ramat Rachel, areas of the Rephaim Valley, the area that are very productive agriculturally. The first site is Ramat Rachel, a palatial compound that was found something like 5 kilometers away from Jerusalem, and I was part of the team that had excavated there. Ramat Rachel has many stages. We know more about the later stages, but Ramat Rachel building phase 1, the first moment somebody built a palace there, is dating exactly to this end of 8, maybe even the beginning of the 7th century, and all the way to 620, 630 BCE, and the decoration with the stone capitals, decoration with the window balustrades and so on. And there's not much I can say about the actual physicality of the site, but I can say that anywhere you walked around Jerusalem, you could see Ramat Rachel. We always stand on the site and we say, oh, they control everything. It's the other way around. Everybody sees them. I think that's the important part of understanding of Ramat Rachel as a projecting landmark in the area. But it's a little bit shy of Jerusalem. And when we were working at Ramat Rachel, this is the kind of the plan of the palace. It's really projecting into the landscape. When we were working there, and especially when I was guiding groups that came, we always thought, how can I demonstrate what is Ramat Rachel? And I sent them, and I'm sorry that I'm going again to 1930, 40 CE. We sent them to the British governor residency overlooking Jerusalem, a location that is not in the city itself. Okay, they're not mingling with everyday life, but whenever Jews and Palestinians quarreled, and Armenians and Christians, there were many to quarrel, they lifted up their head and they knew exactly who is the owner of the land. The UN and the British Empire as their representatives, with garden and so on. And we always said, wow, maybe we can kind of understand Ramat Rachel as a palace that under the Assyrians that function like this administrative center by the British. And we knew very little at that time. And then came 2 more excavations. Neria is responsible for the first one of them, and that's in the site of Arnona, today the American Embassy, if you want to add another empire to the story. And very close to Ramat Rachel, a site that nobody had any idea about, and was just a huge rock pile of stones. And the Israeli Antiquity Authority has excavated below and found a monumental building and another layer, and you'll see in a minute a kind of a reconstruction with tons of evidence for administration, and all of that is dating to these days that are Ramat Rachel 1 exists. So it's before the big palace at Ramat Rachel of building phase 2. There was something at Ramat Rachel, and there's something at Arnona, and who knows, maybe Arnona is even more official than Ramat Rachel itself, and we don't know, there was maybe a shift. And Neria has spoken a lot about exactly the same idea, this projection of the building to the landscape towards the Kidron. Now it's to the east and not to the west. And maybe it's not a farm exactly, but it's an estate that rules over this area. And the use of worked stones, ashlar stones, it seems like a very political landmark and an administrative landmark in the area. And in the publication, Neria and the team and the deep sheets have shown that there are 2 early layers here that are dating exactly to this first part of the 7th century BCE, and Arnona goes down when, okay, this is equivalent to building phase 2. Arnona goes and kind of not disappear, but it becomes less important when Ramat Rachel building phase 2 takes over. That's the bigger palace at Ramat Rachel with the gardens. So there was kind of a centralization of everything into one consolidated building, and not buildings that were built along the hills. So that's building 2. And Arnona was the first one, and while Neria was working at Arnona, Yaakov Billing got a phone call to go to Armon HaNatziv, exactly the location of the British governor residency, and found their amazing architecture from the Iron Age. I don't think there's anything parallel to that, not at Ramat Rachel and not in Jerusalem. Beautiful stone columns, decorated, very typical of the period, And you can see more and more beautiful pictures. Some of them were used as windows balustrades that were reconstructed. And it was clear that there's a building there, but it's not really clear. The building itself almost disappeared from the landscape. And it's all overlooking Temple Mount, okay, the Haram al-Sharif today. And the location of the temple probably in the first temple in the 7th century BCE. And I'll just add that there were also toilets, and Efrat was taking the samples there. Efrat that sits also here. And the toilet is a toilet, and also a kind of preserved pollen that tells us that there was a garden there. And Daphna Langot's work shows that the garden is very equivalent to Assyrian gardens at that time. The use of the palm and so on. These things float on water. So there was a pool with water. This was a beautiful garden that overlooked the kind of the center of Jerusalem. Unlike Ramat Rachel that shies away, now we have a kind of a prominent building that speaks with Jerusalem. Anybody who guided tourists in Jerusalem will start the day standing at Armon HaNetziv and saying, "Do you see that? This is Temple Mount, and this is this what we call the City of David National Park," and you map the whole area. And that's a reconstruction that one of Daphna Langot's students has created of the building and the garden. If I have to imagine the kind of building that stood there, I would go to the Assyrian-styled Bitanu buildings that were built. You see here from Sennacherib's gardens, that it's within a garden, and you have the stone capitals, and it's a building that is like speaking with the landscape. And you can see the figure of a priest or a king, and he's holding a mizbeach, altar, or no, not exactly the altar, the thing that you like with burning incense and so on. Is sacrificing something there, not an animal, but there's something very ceremonial happening in front of the building. Now think of this person standing, and what he's seeing in front of him is the temple. Okay, in the period that we know that Jerusalem became centralized and the temple was supposed to be the only location where you can have ritual connected to God and so on. This is a very dramatic landscape, very active and very kind of against. And if you think, okay, this is one direction, think of now of this direction. Okay, you're standing in Temple Mount, and what you see in front of you is the location of now the British governor residency, but then a Bitanu-styled building in Assyrian style, facing Temple Mount and facing anybody who was conducting a cult over there. And this is the gardens that Ashurban Atzipal had, so you can have this idea. These two landmarks, political landmarks, ritual landmarks, connect to more that were found in Nachal Refaim. I'll run quickly through them. Nachal Refaim has many springs, and along some of the springs, for example, at Jawiza, there was a stone capital that was found. En Khania, another spring, another stone capital that was found by the Israel Antiquity Authority in their work. And I think the entire landscape of Nachal Refaim was decorated with this kind of garden, estates, royal architecture of the Assyrians. And we know now from another PhD work that was done by Azriel Ziegelman from the Hebrew University that these water installations that are very, very sophisticated, they are milking the groundwater into pools, are very connected to Jerusalem. They were dating to the Iron Age, and they seem to be a technology that is spreading out of the city into these royal estates in Jawiza and other examples. And I have claimed that also Hezekiah Tunnel should be associated with this knowledge of water and gardening, and should not be associated with Hezekiah automatically because the Bible says so. And it's more makes sense to associate it with Menashe as a ruler that ruled for 50 years and cooperated and was able to get knowledge as a present and at the same time establish his position as a local leader. And this suggestion was suggested by Knauf and David Osishkin before me. I will simply read in a second what David Osishkin has said about that. It seems that the interpretation of the King's Garden and its construction has to take into account the strong Assyrian influence on Judah during the 8th and 7th century BCE. The king of Judah and his architecture who at that period developed the entangled capital and built various public structures and so on. And then he goes to compare it to the palatial centers at Ashur themselves. So I think it makes a lot of sense to see that also part of the colonial city of that time. So who is Menashe? If we have these equivalents of Weizmann as a more kind of a politician and Khadamin al-Husseini, both of them kind of betting on colonial empires. Husseini betted at one point on the Germans, Weizmann betted on the British, and just watch the series. It's really interesting to see who comes right in the name of history today. I think this is the same way we should look at Menashe and what he's doing in Jerusalem. He's an Assyrian client, but he knows also to negotiate in order to earn things from that moment. And he probably brought Jerusalem to one of its more glorious moments. And if it wasn't for the biblical text, we would probably know more about him. But just like Arnona has disappeared and the stone capitals at Armon HaNatziv were dug and buried, and then the rest of the site was dismantled into little pieces, and Ramat Rachel kind of took over, I think there was a moment there of that all of these symbols that symbolized one sector in the Judean society were completely demolished and disappeared from the landscape. Their message wasn't right anymore, and especially that message. And I think this has to do with the rise of Josiah and a different politics in Jerusalem, a different party. Josiah is the son of Menashe, but he's much more, I don't know, kind of individualist. No, it's not the right word. Nationalist in a way, but nationalist is our world today. More separated and less integrated into the Assyrians also disappeared, and kind of changed the politics and also made sure that all the symbols that are showing colonialization or agreement will disappear. And I think it's like the text and the actual disappearance of the site is working together. But if you come tomorrow to the Azor, you'll hear that they were not so isolated in the last 50 years. And still in the days of Menashe, we are finding things that are global in a sense, coming from Assyria and coming from the world, and kind of connect the elite of Judah still within the imperial colonial world. But that's for tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Oh, wow. Okay, so that was fantastic. Thank you very, very much. Questions?
Yes. I read somewhere that in the Roman times, the Saharan desert was a garden, and obviously there are also many fossils of animals which are not there now. I was trying to just understand from what you showed, if the climate was then the same as it is now, or was it lusher, or was it, I mean, a lot of things, the pictures, the recreations look sort of like it is now, the plant findings.
I cannot say specific for a period, and I think also some articles show that the 7th century was a little bit drier. But anyway, this is like political gardens. They are harvesting the water. They are making sure that there's water so that everything flourish. So nothing in I think the climate was more or less the same as now, and nothing in this. These are people who are overcoming nature. Okay, they are building a palace where it's hard to build a palace. They are creating a garden where everything is dry. So it's part of the statement, I think.
Thank you. I wanted to know, okay. So when you were talking about the attribution of different sites to different kings, and then obviously you were tying it into the Book of Kings, and is there any inscriptional evidence or epigraphic evidence to tie any of these sites to specific ones, or is it entirely?
It's based on archaeological chronology, pottery, C14, not so much, but and so on. And the only one inscription is the one that was found in the tunnel, and it has no name of a king on it. Everybody associated with Hezekiah because it's not even the Book of Kings. I think it's later books that say Hezekiah moved the water. But the name of Hezekiah on one inscription is missing, so we don't really know the king. So no, this is left for the Assyrians and people working in Egypt. They have all the inscriptions. We have to deal with pottery.
Thank you.
Hi. So I want to ask a question about that particular sherd with the drawing of the ruler and the question about what style, who is this representing? Because I am very interested in how colors used can, that one, can demonstrate colonial encounters in a different area of the world, Mesoamerica. And I just wanted to ask if there's been any analysis on what the sourcing is of that vibrant red.
No, nothing
Like
was done like
matter
that.
or
It was found in the 50s. Last time I saw it, I thought we were at the Israel Antiquity Authority storerooms. It almost disappears. You don't really see it anymore. So I don't think they never did it in the 1950s, 60s when it was found. And when I saw it, it was far, far from that image. And I don't think there's a chance anymore, but it's a good idea.
Oh, somebody over here.
You mentioned the hypothesis about northern refugees coming down to Jerusalem. Are you aware of any material evidence that would support that, or is this just kind of something that fits the historical framing best in your view?
Jerusalem overgrows dramatically. And so some, like Magen Broshi was the first, and then Israel Finkelstein claimed that this is not, it cannot happen naturally, it has to be refugees, and it's the Israelites who are running from Samaria after the destruction of Samaria. There is nothing very Israelite in the material culture of that moment, and I don't know if there's a difference between Judite and Israelite at that moment. I think there are more and more works, including some that we are doing now, that shows that Jerusalem grows gradually, and it's not a 10-year event, and so it doesn't have to be refugees. It's still an internal growth, and it's a big argument. It's still out there. It implies at the end of why in the biblical text you have memories that are coming from the north. How did they integrate into Jerusalem? So according to Israel Finkelstein, these are scrolls that were brought from the north, from Beth El and the northern end, and kind of integrated into Judean story. But you don't need to bring hundreds of thousands of refugees. You just need scrolls to do that. So I don't think Jerusalem grows because of the refugees. But that's my opinion on this debate.
All right. Well, thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
There will be time for more questions towards the end, and of course there will be a coffee break, but you know, time marches on. And we need to get to the next period.